Welcome back to the People's Basics, the home of the universal basics. It's time for us to do another episode of doing some commentary around the most important issues of our monthly theme. This month, we're talking about agriculture, and so I wanted to do a follow-up on a segment I was doing in the Basic Brief, talking about corporate greed and its influence on inflation. And I want to highlight one key industry. Given that we're focusing on sustenance this month, we want to talk through the rising food costs that have led to us having record high food prices this year due to inflation, and how there are some corporate influences that have really ramped up these prices on the American people that were unnecessary just for their own greed. So with that being said, let's focus in on the actual problem. So consumer prices this past year overall increased 6.2%. In the past 2 quarters, U.S. corporations, outside of the finance industry, posted their fattest margins since 1950, which is one reason why the stock market keeps hitting all-time highs. Profits were up 37% from a year earlier, according from data from the Commerce Department. And the labor share of national income, there is an index level based off of 2012 levels, has reached 103.59, which is, lower than what we had between like 1947 to 2005 by a lot. But we had been seeing some increases in this level from 2014. Where we had a low of around 98.319 at that period of time. But when it came to 2021, this share in income had a big drop from where we were at the end of 2020, which was at 106.5. So the share of income that is going to labor is in decline. Compared to historically from that whole 1947 to 2005 period, as well as in this year compared to what we were doing in 2020. The Fed has been arguing that lower rates are partly the grounds that helped create a hot jobs market with better pay. When wages were rising faster than productivity, though, Fed officials were starting to worry about inflationary factors. This can effectively, sometimes based on how we try to treat monetary policy, effectively force labor into accepting a lower share of income than they otherwise could get, effectively making this monetary policy very anti-labor by trying to raise interest rates. This quarter, more than 80% of big S&P 500 companies reported results this season that topped even analyst projections for earnings. Almost all sectors are beating their forecasts, apart from the financial services industry. U.S. corporate profits before tax, and including any adjustments for capital consumption, has rose to a record high, reaching now roughly $3.139 trillion at a seasonally adjusted annual rate in the third quarter. When you compare this to the pre-pandemic final quarter of 2019, third quarter after-tax profits are up 39.6%. And in this time period of the pandemic, 700 billionaires have become $2.1 trillion richer. Companies are spending record amounts now of these profits not into investing into the productivity or into giving their labor more wages. They're investing into buying their stock back to raise share prices. This year, they are setting a record high amount, over $1 trillion spent in stock buybacks so far, roughly to the tune of an average of $22 billion in stock buybacks every single week. So, now to talk about food. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO, we have reached the highest prices in food in over a decade. Some specific ingredients that have caused the general higher rates across the food industry has been ingredients such as grains like rice, as well as vegetable oils like palm oil. These are very important because they're often used in the process of creating livestock. This is the feed that so many animals are relying on. And so some people may be relying on these as main ingredients. They might be enjoying rice for themselves. But for people who are wanting other goods like milk or meat or any other livestock related product, you are having these inputs going up in price raise the price of the goods that you desire as well. But there are, beyond these factors of just these specific ingredients, there has been a general problem for harvests across multiple crops due to bad weather. There has been rising freight cost price due to what was a rise in gas prices previously, so transporting the food became more pricey. And there have been some labor shortages as well within the sector. Some say due to the virus of the pandemic, some say due to some of the unemployment benefits, some say that it's just that the industry has not been keeping up to properly compensate, and people are going to other industries to afford their costs. One researcher found that back in July 2020, when the pandemic was, starting to hit into full swing, really, areas near meatpacking plants had far more COVID cases than we were really expecting. About 5,000 additional COVID deaths and about 250,000 additional cases. Put another way, meat packing plants were connected to 6% to 8% roughly of all early pandemic COVID cases and 3 to 4% of all early pandemic COVID deaths. More than a third of the workforce that we've also had was foreign-born, according to a 2020 report by the Economic Policy Institute. And so another factor that has been driving this has been a net decrease in workforce that we've been able to get from immigrants here due to some of the policies that the Trump administration had started, and unfortunately the Biden administration is largely continuing. The industry expected that this labor shortage was going to get easier after extra unemployment benefits had ended in September, but it has not. Across the overall job market, the number of people quitting is surging, and job openings remain near all-time highs. Online postings for meat processing positions are up 66% from a year ago, according to Ernisi Burning Glass, an analytics firm. Meatpackers are indeed generating big profits and rising prices and robust demand, including from overseas markets. We're not having this inflation really impact the bottom line of so many of these agriculture companies. Let's take Tyson Food, for example, the biggest producer of chicken in America. They are saying that, they have been facing staff shortages, meaning that they need to try and get their work done in shorter periods of time. But they're still on track right now to post their highest profit margin ever. They could be slowing down and not having the same level of production or charging less for their products, but they're choosing not to. They're choosing to increase their profit margins. On top of this general greed of not wanting to pay labor what they're properly owed, we're also facing a lot of deregulation in the industry, which is saving employers time and cost, basically, from not having to do certain regulatory requirements to protect their labor. There had been a variety of things done under Donald Trump, who had basically prided himself on trying to be this deregulation president. Some examples include, until recently, poultry processors were required to dispose of chicken that had lesions potentially caused by avian leukosis, a cancer-causing virus in chickens. But under Donald Trump, the Department of Agriculture approved allowing slaughterhouses to simply cut tumors off while continuing to process the rest of the affected chicken. Furthermore, during the pandemic, we had organizations like OSHA, who largely abdicated their responsibility to regulate unsafe workplaces as thousands of meatpacking workers fell ill to the coronavirus, as I mentioned earlier. The agency only issued basically non-binding safety guidances, and it didn't really do much in the way of enforcement due to a general duty clause that required the removal of known hazards. What's more, it effectively suspended a requirement to track and report cases of workers catching dangerous illnesses on the job. Furthermore, another form of deregulation that occurred within the industry is how we made changes to the rules around long-haul trucking. In the past, since the 1930s even, long-haul truckers were not allowed to drive all night because, long hours and mental fatigue could lead to crashes and accidents. But, during an emergency, they felt like, oh, you can't sleep during an emergency. So truckers, we're going to be extending the hours that you're allowed to drive so that you can transport, needed medical supplies, PPE, food, and toilet paper, among other things, which basically allowed them to bypass the 11-hour driving rule within a 14-hour period. And it eliminated requirements to take 10 hours off between shifts. Some safety advocates worried, but then in May, the agency announced that it had basically decided to not just make these short-term measures that were just for the pandemic. They were like, okay, let's make these permanent. And so that's another deregulation that we faced under Donald Trump, is we've had a lot more drivers feeling burnt out from these longer periods that they're being demanded to work. On top of that, we also have things related to labor organizing that were forms of deregulation that were done under the Trump administration that impacted the food industry. For instance, the National Labor Relations Board held a 2-week freeze on union elections. And like any other that can basically confer official recognition of a group or unified workers, they basically said, hey, you can't do any forms of unionization for a temporary period of time. And so this was back in March and April of 2020. Then in May, the National Labor Relations Board basically ruled that some employers no longer needed to post notices to employees when they were caught violating the National Labor Relations Act, which protects the right to unionize. Those violations might include, for instance, a failure to respond to a union request for information or illegally telling a worker not to organize. So there are a variety of deregulations that happen within this food industry that has led a lot of labor to feel burnt out and not want to participate in these jobs for fear of their own safety and for not getting as much labor compensation as they were owed in the past. This is due in large part to the fact that there is so much corporate consolidation in the agriculture industry. For instance, there are only 6 corporations worldwide in the pesticides market, in America, I should say. That includes Monsanto, DuPont, Dow, Syngenta, Bayer, and BASF. They control 75% of the world pesticide market. And then factory farms, they account for 72% of poultry production, 43% of egg production, and 55% of pork production worldwide. And furthermore, only 4 corporations, ADM, Bunge, Cargill, and Dreyfus, control more than 75% of the global grain trade. They overwhelmingly push commodity crops like corn and soy on local farmers at the expense of native crops. In the US, multiple sectors are concentrated into the hands of a few companies with little competition. Here's the percentage of each industry that the top 4 companies own according to Farm Aid. In the beef industry, 84% is owned by the top 4 companies. For hogs, it's 66%. For poultry, it's 59%. For turkey, it's 55%. For soybeans, it's 70%. For corn, it is 80%. And for all seeds, it is 60%. Farmers need to buy things to operate their farms, like seeds, machinery, fertilizers, and other goods. Possibly technology to maintain the land. Sellers that have high market power can basically inflate the prices that farmers must pay for these items. Meanwhile, processors and other powerful buyers can then suppress the prices that they are willing to offer to these farmers. Therefore, it's making it really hard to be a little guy and have any negotiating power in what you're willing to pay for your equipment and what you can then sell your product at, because there are these big players pushing people out. Often having no other options, what happens is these farmers end up selling their land and taking whatever price that they can get because they can no longer operate. And given that there are generally rather razor-thin profit margins when it comes to the food industry, because we are rather price-sensitive when it comes to ingredients that we receive, This is going to make it super easy for a lot of mega corporations to push out small farmers and then basically consolidate the land that they took from them. And so it is necessary that when we are talking about rising prices, that we do not allow media narratives that so frequently put the blame on the worker, that say that the American people are too lazy. That is not the case. America right now is suffering a problem of greed, of not wanting to keep their workers safe, and workers are responding by saying, I'm not going to risk my life for inadequate pay. I'm not going to take it on myself to try and handle these rising costs when I can go to another industry and potentially be safer. We need to be addressing that the market for food is dependent on a lot of other industries and natural events as well. Weather is a big concern for the agriculture industry as well. Transportation costs related to energy are a big factor as well. Both of these things require us to consider more sustainable practices so that we are not so dependent on gasoline volatility, as well as us not being so troubled by volatile weather. So we need to be addressing climate change and transitioning our energy systems if we also want to have food prices be kept intact. So this has been another episode of the People's Basics Commentary. We hope you all enjoyed us breaking down a little bit of the corporate greed that has been infesting the agriculture industry and why there has been record high food prices. We have more content for you to enjoy at our website, thepeoplesbasics.com, that go further into this subject, as well as a variety of other subjects related to the People's Basics, the universal basics. So we encourage you all to go check out that additional content at our website. Furthermore, become a member today. Support the cause for the universal basics and help us grow this movement. You will gain access to premium content of some of the behind the scenes of what we're working on, some archive content from when we were back in the day, the Hill of Roses, some badges and stickers for using our platform here on YouTube, and we will be doing much more feedback premium events. We're looking to transition some of the content that we produce and who we welcome onto the program, and we're going to be starting to make that more often for the premium community, as well as specially invited guests. So if you want to be able to continue coming onto the program, please consider becoming a member today and become one of the universal people. So that's going to do it for us today at the People's Basics. We hope you all enjoyed this episode. We hope you all will leave a like and will subscribe to the network for future content coming out. We have big announcements that are going to be coming out the following week, so we hope you all stay tuned and that you will continue to support the movement for the universal basics. See you all next week.